So, welcome back to Seat at My Table. Today, I am joined by the amazing Tingting Peng, who is the Chief Transformation Officer of a African-born mobility fintech called Moove. But I guess you've done so much more than that. Investor, advisor to startups. I love telling people that you are a globally qualified or international qualified yoga teacher amongst all of that. And you've been recognized by Fintech magazine as being one of the top women in fintech 3 years in a row. So today I just am so excited for this conversation. And first of all, there's so much that I want to go through, but I always like to start by just asking how you describe yourself in 3 words.
Thanks for having me here, Tallulah. You didn't give me too long to think about this. So, I think the first word I would use to describe myself is chameleon.
I like that.
Um, I think I'm someone who I love being in new and different environments. That really excites me, but I also adapt very quickly. And so, like a chameleon, I can kind of change and blend in and really be at home in new situations and new environments. The second word I would use to describe myself is resilient.
Hmm.
So I guess, having lived and worked across different countries, across different cultures, it's, been tough, but also created lots of opportunities for me to really flex that resilience muscle. And then the last word, it's quite difficult to come up with something. So I would say at this point in my life, I am evolving.
Hmm.
Um, I'm continuing to kind of discover more about myself, what I stand for, what I want, what I believe in. And it's interesting, I'm not the same person, although many things are foundational to who I am, but I'm not the
Hmm.
same person I was a decade ago or 2 decades ago, and that's okay. And so, yeah, so it's
Yeah.
I'm evolving, and check back in 5, 10 years time,
Yeah.
see if I stay the same.
Yeah, and so was the fact that I told you that just a few minutes ago, I was going to ask you this question. You did really well in coming up with those. And I think the fact that you describe yourself as a chameleon and really resilient makes a lot of sense when you look at how many different experiences you've had, the fact that you're constantly in different environments and doing different things. I think you really have to be able to change and evolve constantly. And I always think it's so nice to hear someone say that they're still evolving despite being further on in your career, because there is always this expectation that you have to, I guess, become this complete finished person at a really young age. And I think that causes a lot of angst for people. And so it's really nice just to hear people that they are constantly evolving despite being seen as someone who is successful and has done so much in their career. So I guess I would really like to start by just going back to you when you were younger. So I read that you were born in China,
Mhm.
but then you grew up, I think, in Boston, just outside of Massachusetts, or outside of Boston, Massachusetts.
That's right, yeah.
And so I'd love to just kind of go back to that time and understand what you were like as a child, if you were always really curious or ambitious, or if you were actually just really chill and no one would have expected you to go into what you are in now.
Yeah, it's interesting as an adult now, what I remember of myself and what I was like, and I spend time with my parents and my relatives, and they tell me stories of what I was like, and so it's been an interesting point of comparison. So what I remember, I was born in China.
Mhm.
You're right, I left China when I was 9 because my parents had actually left when I was aged 4 and they had moved
Oh, wow.
overseas. And so they'd settled outside of Boston and they were ready to kind of have me join them when I was 9. So I moved to the States, didn't speak a word of English, went to a school that didn't have a English as a second language program. And so I was very lost for a few months in terms of
Yeah.
not understanding anything, and not having kind of additional help or support. But I think as a kid, uh, those types of situations really enable you to to kind of actually adapt and
Yeah.
thrive really quickly. I mean, kids are very, very resilient,
Yeah.
right? So before I knew it, I think I was like fluent in English
Wow.
and also excelling in school. So I did think whether or not I wanted to describe myself as ambitious. And I do think I am, but I think beyond ambition, I've always had this very high or sense of holding high expectations for myself.
Hmm.
Maybe call it confidence, call it ambition, but it's not at all cost
Hmm.
as I've now kind of gotten a little bit older. But yeah, back then it was, I wanted to prove people wrong. I was told, so when I moved from China to the US, I had finished second grade, but because of my age, so I'm a November baby,
Mhm.
because of my age, um, I was able to kind of skip a grade. So I skipped third grade and went into fourth grade. And at the time, the principal said, okay, that's fine, but you're probably not going to be able to go into the top streams.
Mm.
And I just wanted to prove people wrong. And
Yeah.
so within one academic year, I was in the
Wow.
top sets. Um, and I think that that is something that I still carry with
Yeah.
me is I want to prove people wrong. I want to show the doubters that, things are possible, that I can do anything I put my mind to.
Mm.
But yeah, so I spent 13 years just outside of Boston. So growing up in Lexington, high school, and then I did my college undergrad degree at MIT. And that was really the first time I felt um, like I wasn't as smart or as accomplished as I thought. In high school, I found most of the academic subjects relatively not easy, but everything was pretty straightforward. I
Mhm.
was a straight A student. There was a lot of pressure from my parents, as typical Chinese tiger parents
Yeah.
go. And I did lots of activities outside of school, but it was pretty straightforward for me to kind of academically achieve.
Mhm.
And then when I arrived at MIT, it wasn't that. Like I realized there's so many people that were so much smarter. Um, I remember because my dad is a software engineer, he encouraged me to go into engineering and computer science, so I did. And I remember I'm one of my first teaching assistants, so TA led kind of sessions. The TA asked, "How many of you have been programming before?" And basically every single person raised their hands, and I was the
Mm.
only one who didn't.
Didn't. Oh gosh.
And I'd just never been in situations like that where I
Mm.
felt so behind. Um, so I actually ended up switching majors a couple of times until I found business and finance. But yeah, I mean that also that was a lesson in understanding that I don't always have to be the best, and I won't always be. There'll
Mm.
always be people better, smarter, taller,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever adjective you want to use
Yeah.
than me. And really started to get comfortable in my own skin.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's so funny you spoke about this because I had a conversation yesterday with my twin and her boyfriend, and he's studying medicine, and we were talking about a shock that some friends have had going to like Oxford or Cambridge, where they've always been really high achievers, and then
Mm.
all of a sudden they're thrown into a pool with loads of really like other high achievers. And if that's what you attach your worth to, and all of a sudden you're with people who can speak more languages than you or who've collected more degrees or all of these other accolades, and then that was what you tied your self-worth to. It's like, well, where do I stand now? Because I
Yeah.
realized that there's so many other people that are also really high achievers.
Yeah.
um, but I think it's amazing that your instinct was to actually prove people are wrong and to still get to that top set in school. But I think it could also have gone the other way where, you go somewhere, you don't speak the language, you're told that, and you kind of internalize that and maybe retreat and you go the other way. So I'm always so interested to, I guess, hear that and understand people who do lean into it and think, no, I'm going to prove people wrong. And I think that shows throughout your experience. And I would really love to talk about your early years in finance after college in the US,
Yes.
university here. Um, because I remember you said that there was a moment where you were looking around, and I think you were maybe the only female on the floor in the finance role that you were in, and you were questioning if you really belonged there.
Mm.
Can you talk maybe a bit about your early years in your career and maybe why you chose to go into finance and then what that experience was like?
Yeah. So I had a couple of experiences at MIT. I ultimately decided on majoring in uh, management science and with a concentration in finance and a minor in economics, maybe halfway through my sophomore year. So it was pretty late, I guess. And the US university systems are a bit different where you don't
Yeah.
have to go in and declare your major, your area of concentration when you first start. So I changed my mind a few times. And then halfway through my sophomore year, I decided. Then summer of my junior year, I had the opportunity to do an internship at an investment bank in Hong Kong.
Mhm.
And so I'd never been to Hong Kong before, never done banking before. I still remember the interview process where the managing director had asked me, a bunch of questions, theory, right? Like that I had learned in macroeconomics. Um, and I remember struggling through a couple of those interview questions because I just frankly did not remember.
Yeah.
I probably should have started it a little bit harder. Um, but I think he was testing for ability to kind of think quickly
Yeah.
and handle difficult situations. And so had the opportunity to go do that internship, and I was in leverage finance um, for the summer, and had a phenomenal time in the sense that Hong Kong was starting to in terms of the Chinese economy opening up. This was 2004. In terms of the Chinese economy opening up, Hong Kong was like the springboard for many financial institutions and banks to set up to start serving Chinese clients. And so there's a lot of buzz, a lot of energy and excitement in the city. And it was really my first time kind of spending an extended period of time away from home.
Mhm.
Um, and so made loads of friends. I met, I think, couple people from Australia for the first time. Was like so curious about their accent, trying to learn about different people's experiences
Mhm.
growing up and also studying in different parts of the world. And so it was my first real kind of international experience. And then after that summer, I decided I was going to most likely go back into finance. I did have a few different offers, whether it's in New York or San Francisco and then Hong Kong. But ultimately, I decided um, one, I am Chinese, right? So I do have the language skills, I have the cultural kind of connection. And I was really curious about the future growth potential of China and the whole kind of Asia region.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, I can always move back to the US.
Yeah.
Um, and so I decided to move out to Asia to start my career. Um, you have a really good memory. So when I started in banking, I was an M&A, which was at the time primarily focused on execution of deals. So most of my time was actually working with clients, kind of getting them ready either for an M&A process or getting ready for an IPO process, which I actually loved. So I didn't
Mhm.
actually spend a lot of time pitching. Um, but I also saw that um, at the time there was only one, trying to remember now, there was one MD, female MD, um, in our office at the time. And I just, yeah, I was curious as to what my path would look like,
Yeah.
given that there weren't very many role models.
Mm.
Um, and I think I was also struggling with the fact that, and I think this still persists today, right, in investment banking, where you're paid very well for your age,
Mhm.
right? Straight out of college, but you're also expected to be at your desk,
Yeah.
you know, 10, 15, 20 hours a day. And that was my life. It
Mhm.
was, you start the day at 8 or 9 o'clock, you go all the way through and then, finish at 11, 12, 1, go out, grab a few drinks, you work hard, you play hard. That was the
Yeah.
expectation. And then you're expected to be back at your desk at 8 o'clock the next morning. And I just didn't really want to do that,
Mhm. Yeah.
beyond my 2-year analyst tenure. So I think I realized pretty quickly that banking wasn't for me, but I appreciated the everything that I learned, right? The project management skills, the financial skill set, the exposure that I had in working directly with a number of
Mhm.
clients, just because the deal teams were so small. So that was great. And then I moved to the buy side because I think that's what I felt like people were supposed to do at the
Mhm.
time. Like
Yeah.
you spend a few years in banking and then ultimately you move to the buy side because that's where, hours are a little bit better and, compensation and everything kind of you want to end up there. So I, um, I ended up joining a startup hedge fund because I was curious about what entrepreneurship would look like. So I'd been in an established institution where there's a lot of infrastructure and a lot of scaffolding, and choosing between two opportunities, I decided to go with the one that was less known
Mhm.
because I wanted to be part of a founding team, and I wanted to learn how to build a business. Unfortunately, that was also 2007. So Timing
Tough
wasn't
time, yeah.
great. Yeah, exactly. Fundraising environment was very difficult. So I spent about 8 months in the startup, where I was doing, everything from idea generation to trade execution to even like middle and back office tasks. And then I moved to a more established hedge fund, where it was kind of, in my mind, the best of both worlds. Very small team, very lean team, so a lot of responsibility and exposure. But then you also had the infrastructure of a much larger global organization. But unfortunately, 2008, 2009 were still not great years
Yeah.
to be in the hedge fund industry. So I was made redundant at the beginning of 2009, um, kind of at the height of the global financial crisis. But yeah, so I think I
Mm.
had a very condensed experience of having been on the sell side and then moved to the buy side in like
Yeah.
4.5 years, and
Yeah.
then I was out.
I always find it so interesting thinking about, I guess, analysts going into investment banking. So I'm in the banking world, but I'm not expected to work necessarily such long hours on such a consistent basis. And I think it's so interesting because one of the reasons why you go in and do that for a certain amount of time is because if you've done that, you gather a certain level of respect from the rest of the industry because we know you can push yourself to that limit.
Mhm.
And so I guess just quickly before we move on, what was that like when you are working such long hours? You're then expected to go out for drinks. Surely you're extremely sleep deprived. And I also think it's interesting what you said about how you kind of did the next step that you thought you were meant to do because that's what a lot of people do. In that time, did you really struggle? Where did you feel like your kind of health went out the window? And how did you manage your, I guess, social life? Or was it literally just your head down? It was kind of in that stage of, I'm going to prove to people that I can do this, just get to the other side. And then after the 2 years, I'll figure out what to do.
Yeah. So I think my health, I mean, I did go through a few um, kind of challenging periods where, in order to actually escape and this is kind of related to the first question, but in order to escape and provide a balance to the long hours and kind of the hectic nature of the work in banking, I signed up to a gym, which is walking distance to my office. I got a personal trainer, and when I wasn't traveling, I was kind of pretty consistent. Um, it was actually quite funny. I had feedback from my seniors at the time that I was seen by other analysts as spending too much time in the gym. Like people were noticing. People noticed when I wasn't at my desk
Oh my gosh.
that I Tingting's at the gym, because a lot of other colleagues also go to the same gym, and so um, I don't know if the culture is still the same, and it may vary bank by bank, but like, people were watching, what
Mm,
time are you in the office in the mornings, and what time do you leave? Do you eat dinner at your desk or do you eat dinner out? Um, and I mean, now I know because I think I can't really handle my alcohol now, but back then, you've got age on your side, right?
mm.
Because you're still young, your liver's not been damaged yet, so you can still handle
Yeah.
it, and kind of the adrenaline of doing that doesn't catch up with you until much later.
Mm.
So physically, I think I was fine just powering through
Yeah.
work and going out late nights, and then gym, and everything was high intensity. Um, but I mean, thankfully, I found yoga because otherwise, I think I would have had probably more serious health issues.
Mm.
Um, and then when you do get sick, I remember you go to the doctor's office and they would give you antibiotics or whatever it is. And so my body actually became resistant to antibiotics,
Mm.
which I found out later because I had to have a wisdom tooth taken out and I had all these infections, and the antibiotics my dentist gave me wasn't working. So it was the culmination of everything
Yeah.
that that I don't want to say broke me, but it really brought me down to one of the lowest points in my life where
Mm.
I was sick. Social life, had a vibrant social life, or so I thought. Lots of friends in the same industry, so we would always go out together. I was in a relationship at the time which wasn't super healthy. My then boyfriend was also in finance, and I was going through a breakup as I was, like my health was deteriorating, and
Okay.
then work was kind of chaotic, and so yeah, it brought me to a point where I was like, what am I doing. And I was by myself, right? My parents were in the US. Um, my close college friends and close kind of childhood friends were all back in the US as well. And so it was like my health was, wasn't
Mm,
great. Work wasn't going super well because the markets are so choppy. And then my personal life, I was going through that really bad breakup. And so if it weren't for my friends who kind of really lifted me out of a dark place,
mm,
one of them forced me to go to yoga with her, which I really needed at the time. Another one recommended a book called A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, which completely changed my way of thinking about my life. And that set me on a whole new path. So,
yeah,
yeah.
that's amazing. And I think, I mean, I personally, I think friends are just the most valuable things ever. And we don't nurture them enough, especially, I think when I was younger, I probably had a few boyfriends back to back. And it was only until being single for a certain amount of time and I really nurtured my friendships. And I also have two sisters, which are kind of built in friends as well. But you then realize how much you need to lean on them in times like that. But I'm I do really want to go into that book and how that changed how you view your life. And was this point is before you went into asset managing side of things, or was this kind of when you got made redundant that the life turnaround happened? You know, what was that
Yeah.
moment like when? Because I can imagine you were super successful, and in the eyes of the majority of the financial industry, you're kind of at the top, and all of a sudden you're made redundant. It's probably a moment to think, what do I do now?
Yeah. So it's funny because my memory is a little bit fuzzy, so I can't remember exactly what, like the order, the sequence
Mm,
of things. Um, but I still remember that this was sometime in like in the winter, 2008, and I was meant to go. So I was planning to go home for Christmas, and so I was planning to go on a business trip to the hedge fund's HQ, which was in New York, on my way home. Um, which I was really looking forward to because I hadn't met the senior people in the team in person. And then like a week before that, my boss called me into the conference room and sat us all down video conference. And we were told the whole office was being laid off. So the big axe came swinging from New York. So he was like, "You're no longer going to New York," just in case you were wondering. And then, but also at the same time, my boss, who was the PM for our Asia strategy, he said, "Don't worry, I'm going to set up my own fund." And so, he was actually a great boss, but he acknowledged the fact that I was alone in Hong Kong by myself. And so he's like, "Yeah, don't worry. I will take you with me. Just give me some time. I'll set up my own fund." Um, and for some reason, I had this overwhelming sense of relief that our assets had been frozen for a few months, that we couldn't actually execute on any trades or any trade ideas for a while. And so at work, it was almost like, oh, okay, now we know, and now we can kind of move on to the
Mhm.
next step. And I think having that offer, knowing that had somewhere to go, also was gave me a sense of relief. But more importantly, I think I was just like, oh, I can take a break.
Yeah.
I'd been wanting to take a break for a while, and
Mm.
it kind of it allowed me to do that. Um, but yeah, and then I started thinking, um, whilst many of my peers around me, I think there were a couple of other friends who had been affected. And we all got together, and everyone's like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I was like, "I'm completely fine." I actually felt that this overwhelming sense of freedom,
Mm,
because rather than being um, kind of in a position where you have no control
mhm.
over what you can or cannot do, and you had no control over your destiny, it was like, well, now I can do whatever I want for a few months, and then maybe I can get back into it, right? So, yeah, that was maybe a bit ironic and maybe an unexpected reaction, but I actually, yeah, was breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, yes, I can be free.
Yeah. And I think those are really powerful moments in your life. And when actually you're stuck, they call it the rat race, or, you're constantly in a position where you're having to grind. And especially if you're high achieving, you set certain standards for yourself, it's really hard to convince yourself to take that break because it feels like a failure.
Yeah.
So actually, when someone takes it out of your hands, it's like, well, I'm forcing you to take a break because you're made redundant or a business fails or, you get fired for some reason. It's funny how it can still feel like such a relief just because someone's made that decision for you, even if
Mhm.
your body needs it or your mind needs it. Um, and so,
Yeah.
yeah, going back to that book that changed your perspective on how you saw things, I would just be really interested because I know that, and I'd love to talk to you more about this, but you take wellness very seriously and I guess mindfulness, obviously of your yoga and I'm sure other practices. I know you're very conscious of your health. Is that, did that also tie into that new vision that you had of what life was meant to be about after reading that book? And how did you get into the whole wellness health space and then balance that in your career and life?
Yeah, it definitely took a while, so it wasn't an overnight change. Um, but I remember reading the book, and it was like it was a very easy read, and I have since recommended it to a few friends who've gone through kind of periods of uncertainty and chaos in their lives. Um, but I guess for me, because of my high achieving nature, I had a difficult time kind of managing my emotions when things weren't going according to plan.
Mm,
And I would say that that book really opened my eyes to reframing how I see the world and how I can respond rather than react to things that happen. There's like a really vivid description or an analogy in the book that talks about, when you see ducks kind of swimming
yeah.
in a lake or in a pond, they look so serene up top, but
Mhm.
actually
The
underneath,
legs.
they're frantically and uh, as humans, it kind of it's that's how we kind of go through life, right?
Mhm.
And y oftentimes you don't actually see what's going on kind of underneath. But also it was um it was also around I'm almost like I'm the star of my own movie
Mhm.
and everyone else is the star of their own movies. And actually when there's friction or when there's challenge between so interpersonal relationships, whether it's at work or personal, you just can't take things personally
Mhm.
because everyone is kind of going through what they're going through in their
Mhm.
movie. So these were some of the concepts or some of the things I took away from the book that helped me to really manage
Yeah.
how I respond to the world outside. And then also during this time, my friend who dragged me to hot yoga class, she's like, "There's this teacher, you have to go." It's like she's amazing. Um, and I had done yoga before, but I wasn't super into yoga. I was still gymming, like a gym rat at the time. But going to this yoga teacher's class, it was hot yoga. Um, and just the way that she kind of held space with such grace and ease. And I just felt so good in my body coming out of all
Yeah.
of her classes that I started chatting to her about where she did her training and like, which teacher she follows. Um, and I think it was around that time when maybe a couple months later or a few months later was when I got made redundant. And so I decided actually for myself, I wanted to go and study this practice of yoga, the philosophy of yoga, not just the
Mm.
physical poses, but also the philosophy behind it. And so I enrolled in a class. I had wanted to follow the teacher. So my favorite teacher at the time, I wanted to follow her teacher, but he was teaching in the US at the time. And so I couldn't make the travel schedule work at the
Yeah.
time. So I did my first teacher training in Hong Kong. Um, and then, yeah, I had a decision where around that time, I was halfway through my teacher training. My old boss from a hedge fund came back and he said, "Okay, I've set everything up. I've raised the initial money, and I need you to join next week." And I was like, "No, I don't want to," because I hadn't finished my teacher training.
Yeah.
And I explained to him that I needed to finish what I had started, and he didn't understand. He was like, "I need you to start next week." Um, and I kind of I didn't really know how to make that decision. And so I was in a class, and we've been practicing headstands.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, universe, show me a sign. What am I supposed to do? Show me a sign. And so that day I'd been practicing for several weeks, unassisted,
Mhm.
away from the wall, headstands. And for the first time, I was able to get up to a unassisted headstand away from the wall. And I was like, wow, that's my sign.
Yeah.
That's my sign that
Yeah.
I should continue this. And
Mhm.
so I told my old boss that I wasn't unfortunately able to join him. I was like, I completely understand if you need someone, go and bring someone in, but I need to finish what I started. So that door closed. And then I was like, all right, well, let's see what comes out
Yeah.
from finishing my yoga teacher training. And, at least it's a path that I can fully create for myself.
Mm.
Um, that even though I don't know what it holds, I'm kind of more or less in control of my own destiny, and I can paint my own canvas.
Yeah.
So that's how things got started.
I think that's so powerful. And I actually think that yoga, and it really struck me when you said you walked away feeling so good in your body, because I think so few people experience that on a regular basis. I think we become so detached to our bodies and we're so concentrated on achieving things or just going about life, of never actually sitting with ourselves and understanding what we want, or taking a pause and thinking about how we feel in ourselves.
Hmm.
And so I also think that it's really powerful to sit, and when you have that opportunity come your way, it's really brave to turn it down when that was the safe option. You knew that obviously you'd be getting paid a certain amount and it's what you'd been doing. And again, you think about what other people would say. You think, oh, if I told people I had this opportunity, they'd say, obviously take it. I'm sure
Oh,
your parents
100%.
would have said, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, not my parents, but yeah, many of my friends who are still in finance were like, Ting Ting, what are you
Yeah.
doing? People are getting made
Yeah.
redundant left, right, and center. Like, you have a good
Yeah.
paying job on the buy side. What are you doing? They
Yeah.
thought I was
Yeah.
crazy. Funnily enough, my parents actually, when I told them of my decision to go into yoga, teaching yoga, um, they asked me, "Are you okay for money?" And I said, "Yes, I've done a cash flow projection for
Mhm.
myself." Um, Obviously made changes to my lifestyle. And then the second question was, "Okay, well, do you need help?" And I was like, "Nope, I'm financially okay." And then they were like, "We believe that you can do anything you put your mind to," which it was so unexpected because
Mhm.
up until that point, it was always like, I needed to go to, first of all, I needed to get straight A's in high school. And then I needed to go to, a top tier university. And then I needed to get a job at, a global organization, global financial institution. And then it's like,
Yeah.
collecting all these status symbols and kind of check the box. Um, did not expect my parents to be so open minded and so supportive. But I guess, yeah, it was surprising that they were, and they've continued to be to
Yeah.
this day in terms of all the crazy
Yeah.
decisions I've made.
I think that's also such a powerful moment for them to say that to you, because that was probably one of the most difficult moments where you're at this crossroad and doing something very different to what you've done previously. It was probably such a relief to hear that from them. And I'm sure you could walk away thinking, okay, I've made the right decision if they're supporting me as well.
Yeah.
And so, having got that skill of, I guess, being able to sit with yourself, taking that pause, being more mindful of your body, also, gathering those skills and the lessons that you learned from that book of being able to respond rather than react. I would love to know or talk a bit more about your roles later on in your career after this moment when you became a leader and led teams and obviously still going through difficult times. And if you think those skills really helped, because I think those sorts of things, those skills in leadership are probably quite rare, but change how you interact with people, how you approach challenges. And I think it'd actually be great if every manager in finance did yoga and meditated a bit. So, yeah, how have you then taken that forward? And do you think that's changed your leadership style or management style?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think my leadership style is very much grounded um, in this um, belief that as leaders, our primary role is to support and ensure the success of the people that we're leading. Um, and when I was actually doing yoga, so when I was kind of starting to teach yoga, I continued to train as a student. And so I had studied with a teacher based out in California um, around this work of taking yoga off the mat. So it's called Yoga in Action, yoga off the mat. And she talked a lot about service and servant leadership. And that has kind of really been at the core of what my personal beliefs around my leadership style. So it's both the practice of um, kind of breathing,
Mhm.
centering, listening, both listening to people around you and your teams, but also listening to yourself and your body at different points in time. Um, I was actually from becoming a yoga teacher and then going back into asset management. I also had the opportunity to start leading and building teams from a relatively young age. So I joined a boutique asset management company to work on real estate investment opportunities. And I think I was in my mid 20s at the time. And so I was building out a business. I was interacting with both service providers and also clients who are, much older. And being in Asia, again, I was one of the few women, if not the only woman in most rooms as we were negotiating deal structures and doing investment proposals, especially on the real estate side, and talking to contractors and dealing with kind of local regulators and policymakers. And so I think having gone through those experiences, having been grounded in my yoga practice, I was really, really helpful. And then it wasn't until probably really in the last 10, maybe not even 10, maybe 5 to 7 years of having had a few of these types of different leadership experiences, right? So leading as a young professional in new in unfamiliar environments across language barriers, and then also then leading in a completely new context. So I moved from Hong Kong to London when about 10 years ago, and I had to restart my career,
Yeah.
and so kind of rebuild my network. And then leading in that context where I maybe did not have as much credibility or as much as big or as deep of a network as some of my peers, and trying to build that credibility, trying to build that network and leading in that context um, to now, again, working in tech, working in mobility, working in fintech, very different to my previous career in financial services. Demographics of the people that you're
Mm.
leading are also very different. The size of the teams that you're leading is also very different. But I guess fundamentally, it's coming back to what I believe in, which is servant leadership, that, the business can only succeed if I help my team do their best work. And
Mhm.
so, um, and I often think about how do I take my yoga off the mat into the boardroom, right, or into the office.
Yeah.
Not necessarily physically teaching yoga, although I did used to do that in some of my old jobs. But yeah, constantly thinking about how do I take my yoga off the mat, because I also believe that how I do anything is how I do
Yeah.
everything. So as a leader, I believe in showing up with consistency, showing up with courage, speaking my truth. And again, as a yoga teacher, when I step into teaching a class, kind of that's the energy, and those are the beliefs and the principles I'm also channeling. And maybe just one final thing, which is that yoga has taught me around being a leader, but also just showing up as a human, is having the courage to be a beginner.
Mhm.
Because even though I've been practicing yoga for 15, 20 years, sometimes and oftentimes, like, you you have to have the courage to begin again, to be a
Yeah.
student, which is recognizing that you don't know everything, that there's always new things to learn. And as a teacher, if you're not continuously learning, then actually you are not going to be able to be in service
Mhm.
to your students. And I think that's also something that it's very applicable in the corporate world, which
Yeah.
is especially at today's pace of change and innovation, that you've got to be comfortable with the discomfort of not knowing something. You got to have the courage to say, I don't know. But hopefully, you've hired the right people around you who are going to be able to do the work to figure things out. So, yeah, I think I've kind of gone a little bit all over the place, but those are the things I've learned through yoga that
Yeah.
helped me today.
No, I think so much of that is so powerful. And I think as in a leader, you want someone who's consistent, you know what you're going to get, but also who is also able to say, I don't know. And it's funny because I'm reading a book at the moment, and the first chapter It's called Think Like a Freak, and it's by the people who wrote the book Freakonomics and Super
Okay.
Freakonomics. And the first chapter is just about the fact that humans find it so difficult to say, I don't know. And obviously, there's so many negative repercussions that can come from just making things up or not being able to admit that, because you can't ask for help until you are able to admit that. And so I think
Yeah.
it's about being humble, isn't it, as well? And um, also giving yourself the chance to prove that even if you don't know, you just have this faith that you can learn.
Exactly.
And I think that's
Yeah.
where a lot of the fear comes from starting again. It's people don't like being out of their comfort zone or feeling embarrassed. But of course, all you have to do is have this fundamental belief that you just need to have some time and you'll learn and come up to speed. And so
Yeah.
that's how you've been able to gather all of your different experiences. And you've clearly got a key skill set that can be applied in different areas, but you might just need to learn that
Yeah, the
area.
context
Yeah,
or
exactly.
yeah. I mean, I think a lot about so I have two kids and they ask a lot of questions. And more often than not, as they get older, my response is, I don't know, or what do you think?
You
And
tell
so
me.
and so I think that's also very, yeah, very
Yeah,
applicable kind of in
yeah.
the work environment where, with my kids, I want to encourage them to have that sense of curiosity,
Mm,
to have that sense of confidence that if even if they don't know, like how can they possibly figure it out? And I know, management thinking is around, treating your staff like adults, right?
mm,
But actually, I was thinking a little while ago, I was like, but why adults? Like, why
mm.
wouldn't I mean, I guess there's this childlike nature around curiosity, whereas
Mhm.
adults maybe were less curious
Yeah,
because it's kind of been ground down over years of schooling and work. But what if we actually treated our staff like children, where
mm,
we're encouraging them to explore,
yeah,
to make mistakes,
mhm,
learn from those mistakes, as opposed to, yes, we treat them like adults as in the sense that people should be responsible and, can be trusted with making certain judgment calls,
yeah,
as an example. But, what about the other side?
mhm,
Um, which, yeah, as a parent now, I see it so much more
yeah.
clearly that there's so many benefits to treating people like children.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so funny you say that, because I know there's also been studies as well where they do like creativity tests, and the score that adults get is shameful. Like obviously it feels as though the creativity has been ground out of us, or
Yeah.
it's more of a luxury and a playful thing that we don't seem to have the time for. And then they did the same test for young children, and their creativity was off the scale. But of course, I mean, especially in the fintech world where the whole, I guess, areas about innovation and being creative and thinking outside the box. And obviously, the world's changing so quickly, you almost have to be one step ahead all the time.
Mhm.
Of course, you need creativity, you need curiosity, you need to, I guess, eradicate that fear of failure, because you're never going to do something different if you don't take the chance to fail.
Yeah.
So I think that's really powerful. And like, I think so much what you're saying as well, what I love is you can tell that you bring so much authenticity to your roles. So, being a mother and observing your children and bringing actually that superpower of having kids and being a mother into what you do. And obviously, yoga, it goes against typical stereotypes of leadership when we think of, see, in history, a certain male figure that maybe is quite authoritative and maybe just barks orders and everyone just kind of leaps into action and does what they say. Um, and so, yeah, I think I'd love to just touch a bit more on that. How have you been able to, I guess, demonstrate authority or get people to follow and actually lean into that? And even when you're negotiating, like you said, when you were sometimes the only like woman in the room and you were younger and you had to get people to listen to you and negotiate with probably very tough
Mhm.
people, and also getting other people to follow you, how do you actually develop that skill?
So I think I'm continuing to work on that skill. But I think the foundations of it are you've got to do your work. So, you know, even if you don't know, and especially if you don't know, and I think this is something I remind myself all the time. It's why I love being in environments where I push myself outside my comfort zone. It's because if I have a little bit of doubt or a lot of doubt, that I don't know something as well, then I spend a lot more time to get up to speed to make
Mhm.
sure that I've done the work. Um, so that I think that's level one. In terms of leading teams, um, yeah, I'm a little bit the opposite of authoritarian, I suppose. Um, I think part of it comes from just recognizing that I can't do everything by myself. So, how do I empower and support my teams to then be able to deliver on what it is that we need to achieve as a team and as a company? So I spent a lot of my time thinking about communication and communicating the context that the teams need in order to do their jobs well. So, I talked about, servant leadership and that being a foundational leadership principle. So that means ensuring that the teams have all the context, i.e., understanding why we're doing something, understanding how this ties into their specific task or their role, how this contributes to the overall mission or vision of the business, what specific expectations there are, and kind of continuously repeating that
Mhm.
until it becomes habitual in terms of and as well as a shared understanding, right? So everyone really is aligned in terms of what needs to be done. Of course, I think the 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 example you gave in terms of kind of a stereotypical leader at barking orders, I think for me, it's not so much about authority of power. For me, it's more um, demonstrating that I've done my work, um, and that in most cases, I would say um, I'm able to step in and be as close to the details as needed,
Mm.
and therefore being able to ask good questions um, to the teams to push them and challenge them to do their best work.
Yeah.
I think there is a really big difference around telling someone what to do, which is often needed from a leader, right? Like, what's the end goal
Mhm.
versus telling someone how to do it, because there can be many paths to reaching the final outcome. And so that's how I try and approach it, which is be very clear about the what, do my own work so that I can help and support my teams in the
Mhm.
best way possible, and then enabling them to then figure out the how. And again, if they have questions, if they've made mistakes, that there is a safe environment where they can feel comfortable raising those
Mhm.
questions
Yeah.
and concerns, and again for the best possible outcomes that we're trying to achieve together. Um, and then in terms of how do I deal with external stakeholders or external partners, um, yeah, I mean, I think I have my style has evolved over the last 2 decades. When I was still much earlier on in my career, I mean, I was working in quite hierarchical and patriarchal societies like Japan,
Mhm.
where again, I think I needed to do my own homework so that I could show up to meetings, being very clear about what it was that we were trying to achieve, and also questions and concerns that I had. And then ultimately, over the past 2 decades, I think I've also realized that the best types of partnerships, or the best types of collaborations, are ones where it's not a zero sum game,
Mm.
that in order for me to win, someone else has to lose. I mean, that's not my style anyway,
Yeah.
but how do I build a relationship where it is beneficial for everyone and we all have something to gain? And so, therefore, the harder we work, the better the outcomes
Mhm.
together. And so, that's my kind of approach in terms of um, coming across with um, clarity
Mhm.
around what we're trying to achieve, consistency in how I show up to meetings, and consistency. I think it's both internal and external, and then collaborative approach,
Yeah.
so that um, it's clear that I want the best outcomes. And of course, I feel like this is, as you said, it's probably not a very typical approach. And so I do have to just be mindful of, the tone that I use sometimes if I need to be, a bit more direct, culturally being aware of when I deal with counterparties in Asia, where there's again more hierarchy in terms of how
Yeah.
I speak, to whom I speak, really understanding the audience, versus in Europe and US, where maybe I can be a lot more direct,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I think it's also just trying to get to know people as people, building those relationships over time,
Yeah.
because careers are long. You know, the average career is what, 45 years or something
Yeah.
like that. So it's not just a transactional thing that you're trying to maximize value in that
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah. And also, I think actually the world is so small. You come across the same people so much more than you'd ever imagine. And so, actually, building up a good relationship is so important because you never know when you'll meet them again, or you never know when actually they'll tap you on your shoulder for an opportunity because they did really enjoy working with you, or you got to build that relationship. Um, and I actually think when I look back at your career, there's been so many different roles where communication and relationship building has been so important, especially when it's negotiating or raising. I think actually raising funds and that being able to have certain difficult conversations because we're talking about big sums of money, convincing people to actually, give over control of huge sums that other people probably never hit, like even having their day job, like millions of dollars. And so actually to build trust is so important to get them to see what's in it for them. Because like you said, you do want them to be in a position where they're gaining from this negotiation or this deal. But sometimes you actually need to be able to convince them why it will be a win for them.
Mhm.
And so, like we spoke about previously, when you said actually understanding their wants, what their context is, and really what comes before all of that is the relationship and making sure that you've built up a space where you can actually get to know them. And I think that's probably a huge superpower that not doesn't come naturally to everyone. um, and I guess this also goes into your role now, CTO of Moove. And it's interesting because obviously CTO can be chief technical officer, chief transformation officer, obviously in your case, chief transformation officer. And yeah, I saw that it's about taking strategy and executing it, um, which I can imagine is extremely a difficult thing to do when there's so many different moving parts. So I'd just love if you could talk a bit about that and what the day in the life looks like, and also what it's like working with your founders and actually maybe even how you got into the startups. I know you weren't necessarily in this role at the
Yeah.
beginning, and it was an interesting story.
Yeah, so I joined Moove over 4 years ago. My first title, I think, was head of investor relations and ESG or something. So we've come a long way. Um, but yeah, I met one of the co-founders through a mutual friend. I was working in private credit at the time, but I knew I wanted to pivot into tech. I knew I wanted to do something that had the ability to create lots of positive impact. And I was also very curious about emerging markets because, you know, for a decade I was in Asia working in emerging markets. And so I wanted to get back into it. And so Move kind of checked all three
Yeah,
boxes. So it was quite a serendipitous connection. But yeah, when I first joined, my focus was on primarily raising equity capital. And then I also put my hand up for covering ESG and impact because we had these foundational impact pillars and there wasn't a formalized function around that. And since then, I've kind of continued to oversee equity, um, fundraising, investor relations. Also spent some time on the debt side, given the number of lenders that we have and the amount of debt that we've raised, kind of really institutionalizing the lender relations function. I've also been involved in corporate strategy and corporate development. So we closed two M&A transactions earlier this year, one of which has been announced. The other one will be announced soon. And I've also worked on external and internal communications, um, which I think kind of fits in nicely with all the work that I do with our investors who
yeah,
are a key stakeholder. Um, and so my current role was something I designed for myself, if I'm completely honest, because over the past 12, 18 months, we've really bolstered our senior team. So we've hired a chief financial officer. We've brought in a new CTO, so chief technology officer, a new chief legal, a new chief people officer. And so with the strengthening of the executive team, um, I on one hand, it was a little bit confusing because I was like, okay, well, there were all these things that I used to do, but now there are other people who are
yeah,
doing parts of my role, which is, you know, it's a natural progression or natural evolution of a startup journey. So I was like almost making myself redundant by handing over parts of my job to other people who are, had gone through this before. Um, but at the same time, I saw that there was an opportunity for a role that can be highly cross-functional and more project oriented. So when you have a business like ours that's operating in, over a dozen cities across 5 continents, it's still scaling at a crazy pace, that also still has, really ambitious goals. How do we make sure that things don't fall between functional cracks? Because you could argue that if there is a cultural transformation kind of project in the business, that it should be the chief people officer. But actually, it's not just a people or HR initiative. It's most likely going to have digital components around our systems and our tooling. So, how do we actually enable cultural transformation across the business? What does that actually look like? What are the work streams that need to go into it? And for that's one example, of course, and there are many others that if we also think about having acquired two businesses, what is that integration process? Or how do we continue to run these different businesses
Yeah.
autonomously if that's the approach? And that is the approach that we're taking in different geographies. And so I kind of created this chief transformation officer role to capture that opportunity set for project oriented work that's really systems wide, that has the potential to transform the business in new ways, um, that can either be solving for existing problems or gaps in the business that functional leaders frankly don't have the capacity in their BAU to do,
Hmm.
still needs to be done. So foundational work. And then possibilities, which is innovation, new areas of innovation, things that we not thought about that are new areas of business opportunity for us. And again, because they're new opportunities, it will not fit into a
Yeah.
nice functional
Yeah.
area. And so therefore, it's kind of that was the idea at
Yeah.
the very beginning. Um, to then for me to work very collaboratively with the rest of the C-suite
Yeah.
um, to make sure that their jobs and their roles can be amplified.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds really exciting because it sounds like you touch every part of the business. And so you're getting involved in everything, but also you never know what you're going to come into because it depends on what the strategy is going forward or um, anything that can happen or something's identified as, like you said, like the foundation isn't quite working correctly and you need to step in and I guess bring in the people of the business that are needed to, I guess, solve different issues. So it sounds as though it's a really exciting role that
Yeah.
you've created for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did a lot of research.
Yeah.
So when I came up with this idea, I was like, Chief Transformation Officer. I wanted to just understand, have other companies done this before? And
Mm.
actually, to my surprise, I mean, I don't know if you've done this kind of research, but to my surprise, it's actually the role, the title has been around for some time.
Interesting.
So there were some really interesting McKinsey and BCG articles around. It's primarily more established companies that
Mm.
actually, because of their legacy business, they were really trying to push innovation. So they needed to bring in someone to kind of be
Mm.
the lead on transforming the
Yeah,
business.
shake it up.
Exactly. And typically it's around digital transformation, but it doesn't have to be. Um, and so I think one of the reports described it as um, the military sergeant,
Mhm.
that runs the drills, that pushes the company to be in kind of the fittest shape
Mhm.
possible and sustain that level of performance over time.
Yeah.
So when I read that, I was like, that's exactly kind of how I envision I mean, I love fitness, so any kind of fitness analogy
Finish it.
is straight up my alley. But
Mhm.
I was also thinking about how, especially in kind of fast growing startups and scale up environments where you're constantly experimenting, actually being able to sustain performance over time
Mm.
is something that I think we struggle with, and I know other founders I've spoken to also struggle with that. You start something because there's an opportunity or you're trying to solve a problem, and then before you know it, there are 20 other priorities, and
Yeah.
then things get deprioritized. And so because there's a lack of accountability and clear accountability
Mm.
from the top that someone's actually responsible for key strategic transformational initiatives across the
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
that you're constantly like, okay, 10 push-ups or 10 burpees, and then you do that over time. That's how you see results.
Mhm.
Um, once you've had product market fit, once you're kind of revenue
Yeah.
generating, you have certain systems and processes in place, but maybe there's still quite a bit of chaos. And so,
Mhm.
how do we, as a company, sustain performance over time?
Yeah.
Um, it's it, I was kind of also self-describing it as probably the least liked role because I'm going to be the one kind of calling you up and
Yeah.
saying,
Have you done this?
have you done this? And if so, how is it going? And if
Mm.
not, why not?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so people may not always, like that, but
Yeah.
actually it's much needed
Yeah.
because of the chaos of a
Yeah.
startup environment.
Exactly. And we are talking about before, creating a culture of curiosity and creativity and being willing to fail. And I think in a company like this where probably new ideas are encouraged and exploring different things, you need someone who, when there are different ideas happening all the time, or when, you might trial something and it fails, making sure that I guess that's rounded up in an appropriate way. And then the ideas that do come up are followed through and actually people don't just get distracted. Like I can imagine it's just so difficult when, like you mentioned previously, I think there's about 400 people in this company. Who's actually going to sit on top and make sure people are doing their job? And like you said, it might not be liked, but I think people will appreciate it, and also people want to see the business succeed at the end of the day, and that's
Yeah.
such a needed role. But I'd love to just know, I guess, more generally, what is it that you really enjoy? So if you're looking at the next stage of your life and where you are at the moment, what fundamentally do you think like really lights you up, and you think, no matter where I go, I really want this to come with me, this feeling or this aspect of my role?
It's a really good question. Um, so I've 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 kind of been very focused for the past 15 years since leaving finance on going into companies that create positive impact. So regardless of what my role is, knowing that that role and my contributions to the business will be able to contribute positive impact. So whether that's either working in a mission-led company that directly creates impact, or working in a normal company, but in a role that specifically then can contribute impact. So I think having that sense of purpose is really important to me. And then I think what else is important? The opportunity to continue learning and growing in whatever role I have. And that could be organic. So, being able to take on stretch assignments, being in new roles that I've not done before, for example, um, so that I can continue to stretch and learn and develop and grow as an individual and also as a professional. Um, what else? I mean, I probably I'd like to say travel. So like being able to experience new cultures, because one, I love traveling, but also two, um, I love being able to kind of connect across cultures and work with very diverse teams. Um, but as I get older, I imagine traveling is probably going to start taking a toll on me. But whilst I can enjoy it, I'm going to still continue to
Mm.
enjoy it. And then so I've had the opportunity to build different types of teams and different size of teams. And I've also been in roles where, I've been more of an individual contributor. So I think I'd love to have the flexibility of doing both.
Yeah,
Um, I didn't think, if I'm completely honest, I didn't think I would be a good manager of people.
that's so funny.
But I actually did enjoy that when I was tasked with building out teams. And like I didn't enjoy doing performance reviews and all of that, but actually over time I told myself that was just a story
Mm.
that I said to myself because it was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But actually, I did really enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I think having the flexibility of if there's a project that I really wanted to do as an independent contributor, being able to do that, but then also being able to have the flexibility to manage and build teams. So I think flexibility then would be really important, more than the actual scope of the
Yeah.
role itself.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, being able to go into a role, make it your own, and having the freedom, like you've done in your current role, look at what you think is needed and then build on that and expand. And I think as human beings, we always want the scope to be able to grow and change and actually be creative. Sometimes I think you can probably go into a role and the people who are deciding that role or the legacy of that role is so strict that you don't have the breathing space to then mold it to what it needs. And obviously that's a sign of maybe poor management of the company and the company needing to change that. Um, I also just want to touch on, I guess, you as a person and how you balance everything. Because obviously in previous conversations, we spoke about your kids, the fact that you travel so much, your travel schedule is unbelievable to me. I don't know how you stay on top of it. And then also obviously having probably quite a high pressure and intense role that takes up a lot of your time, as well as, I know you mentor a lot and you advise other startups potentially. I know you've done that in the past, and you wear so many different hats. So how do you manage that and balance that?
I don't know if I've got it completely figured out again. So I am very mindful of blocking out time for myself because I ultimately, at the end of the day, I think I'm an introvert at
Mm,
heart. So every day I need to block out some time so I can have focus time or workout time, even if it's just for a short walk or something like that. So I think that's a non-negotiable for
mm,
me. Um, some of the other things I've been doing just in terms of watching my sleep,
mhm,
actually, I've sacrificed sleep for many, many years, and now actually having read a lot more around the detrimental impacts of sleep over decades, I'm now prioritizing that as part of ensuring that I can kind of live longer,
mm,
more healthy, more health and healthier. Um, and then diet. So exercise, diet, and sleep are the three things I focus on to kind of maintain my health.
mhm.
Because without my health, there is no balance.
Yeah.
And so with that, then it's I try and be as structured as possible with my work schedule so that my calendar is actually completely visible to everyone in the company. So if people want to book times with me, they can, and they can see, I put school drop off, school pickups, where I'm going to be working from if I'm traveling, so that people can see exactly where
Yeah.
I'm going, and what I'm spending my time on. And then I block out focus times,
Mhm.
right? So Fridays typically are no meeting days for me, although it doesn't happen all that often, but I try.
Limited as much as you
Exactly. But at least that's a starting point, right?
can.
So Fridays tend to be a little bit quieter. Um, and so yeah, schedule management from a work perspective.
Mm,
And then finally, it's a constant negotiation with my husband around um, who's doing more at what points in time around the house. But I am really lucky that he is very much a partner in our family lives. So he cooks, I don't cook.
mm.
um, and, he'll do school drop offs and pickups. And we try and just manage and negotiate
Yeah.
the schedules with kids as well. And now the kids are a little bit older, so it's a little bit easier.
Mm,
Easier in some ways that they're self-sufficient, but harder in other ways because they have more activities that we
yeah.
need to drive them to. But then, we also have help. So other families and other parents that can help with, they can take our kids to football practice
Mm,
and we do pick up later. That's always very helpful. And then having the support around the house, right? So having a cleaner that comes once a week, so I don't have to worry about
mm.
laundry piling up at the end of the week, things like that. But it's yeah, I constantly feel like I don't have enough time.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I
Yeah.
think as long as I'm healthy, as long as I'm um, spending time, focused time at work and prioritizing that, but also spending focused time with my kids, my family, my friends.
Mm,
Um, and this is where actually traveling for work is really helpful because I can usually see my friends and family when I travel for work
yeah.
as well. Um, so yeah, it's a bit exhausting when I
Yeah.
think about it. But I mean, we're sitting here on a Sunday
Yeah.
afternoon, right? So
Yeah.
my kids have, I don't know what they're doing. I think they're 3D printing or something. So
That's cool.
but yeah, it's I think it comes from um, knowing what you want to prioritize. And
Yeah.
for me, it's health,
Hmm.
and then making sure that my schedule is very structured.
Yeah. And I think something that obviously you've spoken about and is so clear with the schedule aspect of things is just transparency. So, like I said, everyone can see your calendar, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're available to everyone. You're actually putting in time. Like I'm doing the school drop off and pick up, and so you can't put time in here, but everyone knows exactly where you stand, I guess your priorities, and then they then can fill in the gaps around that. And I think that goes back to like communication and transparency and um but it's funny, I like hearing other people say that they feel like they never have enough time because this is just a constant battle that I have with myself.
Yeah.
Where I think when you're someone who probably is just really excited about so many different things and you want to have amazing friendships and family, but you also love working and you don't necessarily see that as a chore and you want to lean into that and you want to take up all these different opportunities, it can be really difficult because there's never enough time to do everything that you want to do. And so I constantly have this battle, and I think it's just sometimes nice to hear people say it out loud. Um, but I see we've been talking for about an hour and a half,
Oh,
so
wow.
um, I just want to finish off with one final question. And I guess I know that you're an amazing mentor to many people, and you've had incredible experiences. I guess what is one piece of advice that you find yourself giving to other people and yourself more than any other piece of advice?
Oh, interesting. So I think the one piece of advice I've also reminded myself many times in the past, as well as given to other people, um, is do the thing that scares you the most. So if you have choices, and most people are, I think, lucky enough to have different choices, whether it's in their careers or otherwise. Yeah, like really get clear on what scares you the most and why, and leading to that,
Yeah,
because that is where you're going to grow, where you're going to be challenged, and where you're going to learn. Um, and I think you'd be surprised at what's possible and what you can do.
yeah.
So
No, I love that. And I think it also there's such a level of self-esteem that comes from doing stuff that scares you and overcoming that because then you just feel unstoppable and then you're more likely to do another scary thing and it's just proving to yourself that you can overcome your fears. It's so
absolutely,
powerful.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice to leave on. But thank you so much for this conversation. It's been amazing.
Thank you for having
No,
me.
thank you.